Okay, folks, so in this video, we're going to walk through setting up a new Avid project. And of course, the first thing is to open ISIS Client Manager and log on to your partition. In my case, I have a lot of partitions, but you'll only have yours and the common drive. It mounts to the desktop, and now we can see all of our folders that are here. So let's open Avid. Right there, Avid Media Composer. Avid Media Composer will take a couple minutes to open. It's just sort of a slow program. Okay, and with the magic of editing, I have fast forwarded 30 seconds and I'm now at the opening splash page of Avid. So, the first thing you should always do when you get to this screen, and it doesn't matter whether you're opening an existing project or creating a new one, no matter what you're doing, the first thing you should do is click on this little folder icon. What this does is tell Avid either where to look for the existing projects that you want to open or where to create a new project. It may be tempting to go ahead and click the new project button, thinking that then it's going to ask you where you want to save it, but Avid is different. You got to tell it where and then hit new project. So right now I've set this to be at private, and you may have noticed because I may have mentioned it in class, this should always be set to external. However, the thing is, if you go to the project directory and you navigate to your partition, it will automatically change this to external. Private means it's on the computer's hard drive, which as we know, it should never ever be. I've set it up this way on purpose just to demonstrate what it looks like so you don't get confused. Okay, so when I hit the project directory button to navigate, you might get confused because the first place that pops up is, yes, an Avid Projects folder. And you think, yes, that's correct. All my projects should go in the Avid Projects folder. However, they should go in the Avid Projects folder on your partition. You'll see here that this Avid Projects folder is in the Documents folder of this particular computer, which is wrong. Okay, so remember, even though your partition mounts to the desktop, if I go here, I'm not going to see it. I've got to go under Devices to this computer, and then I can see the partition. Now, in this example, I'm going to show you on Emily's partition because it looks a lot more like yours than mine does. So if I go into Emily's Avid Projects folder and then click OK, you'll see that this is going to switch from private to external. Okay? So it knows external means that it's on the server partition. And you are always going to be working, as you know, on your server partition. So now that we have our destination set, let's go ahead and click New Project. And here we get to the project name and project settings. Now, this is kind of important to know. You cannot rename Avid projects after you've named them right here. So choose wisely. For now, I'll just say Test Project 190. Avoid slashes in file names and folder names in general when working with Avid. Just avoid them. They can cause problems. Now, format. This is your resolution on the left and your frame rate on the right. And it is very, very, very important to pick the correct frame rate. So first of all, your resolution should be 1080. How do we know that? Well, that's HD. And on your Canon DSLR, if you remember correctly, your resolution is listed as 1920 on the left side. Well, 1920 and 1080 are really the same thing. The 1080 is referring to the vertical number of pixels in an HD image, and the 1920 is referring to the horizontal number of pixels in an HD image. So an HD TV is 1080 by 1920. So really the same thing. Now your frame rate, this is a little bit confusing. It says on the DSLR that you're shooting in 24, but really video formats shoot in very close to 24, but it's actually 23.976. True 24, as far as Avid is concerned, or any editor, is reserved for actual film that gets digitized. If you shot on video, you're actually shooting in 23.976. So even though it says 24 on your DSLR, you're actually shooting in 23.976. So make sure you select this one. And really, everything you do in 190 is going to be the same setting. So just memorize this one, 1080p, 23.976. You shouldn't need to change any of this other stuff. So just make sure that you get the frame rate, resolution, and your project name the way you want them. Click OK. And now we have the project we just created, which has come up in our menu here. You'll remember that Avid projects are folders. They're not individual files. So in our Avid projects folder, we have 3 projects. They are all folders. They correspond to the things that pop up in this menu. We click Open when we're in the Avid projects folder, not when we're in an individual project folder. Okay, now I can select the new project and click OK to open it. Okay, and we're in Avid. Now, the very, very first thing you should do when you open Avid, this should be like putting on your seatbelt when you get into a car. The first thing you should do is go to Media Creation. Easiest way to get there, Command 5. Okay? Menu items, it's under Tools, Media Creation. Okay? Click on this, go to the Import tab. There's several that would work, but the Import tab is the most relevant to you, and make sure that the drive listed here, which is where Avid is going to import the files, is not set to Macintosh HD, but is set to what? You guessed it, your partition. So I'm going to click Emily's partition and apply to all. Okay? Now this is the codec that's being used to create new media. We'll talk about what that means later, but for now, make sure that this is set to your partition. So one more time, we open Avid. Do nothing in Avid ever until you have checked media creation. Command 5. Import, make sure that this says your partition. Okay, there are 3 folders that I want you to get into the habit of making. First is source. Now what do I mean by source? You might think of this as raw footage. Why do I not call it that? Because it involves more than footage. Any kind of media, any kind of asset that you bring in, it should go here first, and it should stay here. When you want to work with it, you clone it into the working bins folder. Now, what is working bins? You should think of working bins as the space for you to organize in whichever way is most intuitive to you. Okay? So create bins as you think they should be, whether that is based on scene, based on cut, based on type of footage, whatever makes sense. The working bins is the folder that you can organize in the way that just makes sense for your workflow. Okay? The third one that we're going to make, third folder, is sequences, and I put an underscore there so that it always pops at the top. Okay? Now, what we're going to do is we've got to create some bins in our source, all right? And I'm going to import some footage, and I'll just go ahead and pop up here over here to the Finder and show you what I'm going to bring in. All right, we're on Emily's drive, and I've planted some things in her media drop, and I planted this sort of fake backup folder called 09/02/14 day 1 footage. This is how I would name a card backup folder, with a date and just sort of a description of what that shoot was. So the way that I like to do this is in my source bin over here. I'm going to do Command New for a new bin, and I'm going to name this the same thing as it is in my media drop. So 09/02/14 day 1 footage. That way I can always trace it back and not get confused. I put that bin into my source folder, and remember, I can double click this to open it. Oh, I should also remind you that it automatically creates a bin based on the name of the project, which I find utterly unhelpful, so I usually delete that bin. Okay, now I'm going to double click this bin. It opens in its own window, and now I can right click and import. Where am I going to import from? Well, make sure that I'm on Emily's partition, so device, partition, media drop, in this folder. Go through all my subfolders, because remember, you will have backed up the entire card. Select all the files. You can also hit Command A and open. Now, this process takes a few minutes, so we're going to skip through it with the magic of editing. And here we are, 10 minutes later. All of our clips are here in our bin. And at this point, you may be wondering, why can't we just start editing with these? Why do this whole distinction between the source bin and the working bins? Part of it is just trust me at this point. For a basic explanation, let me just say that what seems neat and tidy and organized right now in your source bin can become very disorganized and a tangled mess when you start doing things like renaming your clips, reorganizing your clips in different folders, syncing video clips with audio clips, transcoding things into different formats. It gets very confusing. So the idea behind the source versus working bins is let your original copies of all your media stay here. Don't move them, okay? But create a separate system of working in the working bins where you can do whatever you want to and have freedom. You'll be working with clones of the original files in the working bins. Okay, so let's see this in action. Here's some footage that you have seen already. I've got some interviews that you guys shot in class on the first day. And then I've got some B-roll that I shot around the basement. And finally, I've got some shots of some folks recording some music in the sound studio that I stumbled upon while I was shooting the B-roll. So a natural organizational system comes to mind. Let's create 3 bins in here. Again, Command N for new bin, and I'll call this one interviews. Command N, and I'll call this hallway B-roll. And Command N again, and I'll call this sound studio. Now, these are 3 working bins. I'm going to put them in the working bins folder, and they all open in their own windows when I create them. Now, I'm going to go through my source bin, and I'm going to sort these things out. So if I double click them, it'll load them into the source monitor. Oops. So, first clip, Jenna. She goes into interviews. Now I don't click and drag because that's going to move it. It'll move it from my source bin. What I want to do is clone it. So what I'm going to do is hold down Option. And please note that you have to hold down Option before you click and drag. Okay, so I'll do another one. Here's Gael. I'm going to click, I'm going to move, and then I'm going to hit Option. Doesn't work. It actually moved this clip instead of cloning it. Okay, but if I hold down Option and do this, it'll clone it. Now, if I change the name of the cloned file, so I'm going to change this to Gael, guess what? It gets changed over here too. This is what a clone does. I change this to Jenna, boom, it's changed over here. But these are my original source files. They will always stay in my source folder within the bin labeled for that particular shoot. Again, if you don't believe me or understand what I'm doing, just please do it for now. I promise you it will make sense, and as you work with more and more complex projects, this will be a very helpful framework within which to work. Alright, so I'm not going to do all these for the purposes of this tutorial, but I would basically clone by holding Option and then dragging all of these things over into the interviews working bin and renaming them according to their names. Then I would find some of the sound studio footage. Option. Oh, where's my sound studio bin? There it is. Option, drag. And I can call this CU, that's close up, hands on soundboard, or something like that. Now, here's a hallway cutaway. Option, drag this here, and I'll call this Video Labs Sign. You get the idea. You want to organize your footage in the working bins in whatever way makes sense to you. You can rename things, you can start to cut with these clones, and it's a way to keep things organized. Alright, thanks for listening.